What did your sister do that you'll never forgive? I was getting an ultrasound when my sister called. Hey girl, I just found out I'm pregnant, and I need to name the baby Daniela. I froze. Daniela was what I wanted to name my child. Cindy, that's what I'm naming my baby. You know that. Okay, but I need this name. It's the only thing keeping me going since Dad died. I pinched the bridge of my nose. I was the only one to visit Dad when he had cancer. I was the only one who spent 4 months sleeping on hospital chairs while Mom had already moved in with her boyfriend, claiming she didn't sign up for this. The night before Dad died, he'd grabbed my hand and said, "Name her Daniela. After me, Daniel." Those were his last words. Cindy, Dad specifically asked me, "Lucy, I already told Grandma. She's so excited about baby Daniela. You know how confused she gets with her dementia? 2 Danielas would be too much." I looked at the screen showing my daughter, just 8 weeks from being born, already Daniela in my heart. We'll talk about this later. By the time I got home from the appointment, Mom was at my door. "You need to pick another name," Mom announced, not even bothering with hello. "Cindy's already committed to Daniela." Noah, my husband, looked up from assembling the crib. "Are you serious right now?" "I co-sign your mortgage," Mom said, her voice cold. "I pay your car insurance, your phone bill. Cindy has had 3 miscarriages. Let your sister have this one thing, or I'm cutting you off." The pressure was suffocating, but I stood my ground. The breaking point came when I went into labor. 22 hours in, exhausted and vulnerable, Mom and Cindy arrived at the hospital. "Last chance to be reasonable," Mom said while I was between contractions. "Cindy's only 2 months behind you. Do you really want our family split over this?" Cindy was sobbing, rubbing her belly. "Baby Daniela is the only reason I'm here. I was so tired. Everything hurt. Fine. Just please leave so I can have this baby." 3 hours after giving birth, holding my daughter, Mom returned with a smile. "Good news! I called Brad to come support Cindy through this emotional time. He's so excited about becoming a father." The color drained from Cindy's face. "You called who?" "Brad, your baby's father." Cindy stood up so fast she knocked over a water pitcher. "I need to go. Morning sickness." But Brad was already walking through the door. He looked at me holding the baby, his face brightening. "Oh wow, congratulations, Lucy." Then he turned to Cindy, confused. "Wait, you're pregnant? Since when?" Mom laughed nervously. 7 months along, with your daughter Daniela." Brad stared at Cindy for a long moment, then burst out laughing. "That's impossible. I had a vasectomy 3 years ago before we even dated. I told you on our first date I never wanted kids." The room went silent except for my heart monitor. "The vasectomy must have failed," Cindy said weakly. Brad pulled out his phone. "I get tested yearly. Here's last month's results. 0 sperm count." He looked between us all, realization dawning. "Oh my gosh, is this about that inheritance thing? You called me last month asking if I'd play along for some family money. Offered me 10 grand to show up at family events." "Cindy?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "Grandma was going to leave everything to Lucy." Cindy exploded. "I had to do something." "So you lied about being pregnant?" It made Grandma so happy. I thought about all the ultrasounds she'd sent me. Those pictures. Google images. The morning sickness you kept talking about. Ipecac syrup. Something snapped in me. Hours of labor. Months of guilt. Years of manipulation. I lunged forward and grabbed at her belly, ready to rip the fake padding away and expose her once and for all. But that's when I felt it. A real bump on her belly that felt just like mine. I pulled back in shock. "Wait, so you are pregnant?" Cindy went completely still. Brad was already at the door. "Well, it's not mine, so whose is it?" That's when Noah, my husband, went white as a sheet. Brad's eyes locked onto Noah and he took a step closer to him. I asked whose baby it is. Noah's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. His hands gripped the arms of the hospital chair so tight his knuckles turned white. The silence stretched on and on while everyone stared at him. Even Mom stopped talking for once and just watched Noah struggle to speak. Sweat beaded on his forehead and rolled down his temple. Brad crossed his arms and waited, not breaking eye contact. That's when the nurse pushed through the door and looked around at all of us. "Is everything okay in here?" We can hear raised voices at the nurse's station. I shifted Daniela to my other arm and pointed at Mom and Cindy. "I need my visitor list updated right now. Only medical staff from now on." The nurse nodded and pulled out her tablet to make notes. Mom's face turned red and she started yelling about her rights as a grandmother. The nurse stayed calm and called for backup while Mom's voice got louder and louder. 2 more nurses appeared and they surrounded Mom and Cindy, moving them toward the door. Mom grabbed the doorframe and tried to plant her feet, but the nurses kept pushing her forward. Cindy followed behind them, one hand on her real baby bump, not even trying to fight back. Brad slipped out past them all, saying something about having said his piece. Noah stayed frozen in his chair, staring at the floor and breathing hard. Once everyone else was gone and the door clicked shut, Noah stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. "I need some air." He practically ran from the room before I could say anything. I sat there holding Daniela, feeling the weight of her tiny body against my chest. Dad's last words echoed in my head about naming her after him. The promise I made to him felt even more important now with everything falling apart around us. My phone started buzzing on the bedside table with text after text from Mom. She threatened to stop paying my car insurance immediately if I didn't let her back in. Then came threats about the phone bill and how she'd call the bank about the mortgage. I turned the phone to silent and focused on getting Daniela to latch for feeding. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine as she ate. The financial threats seemed so small compared to finding out my husband might have gotten my sister pregnant. Hours passed and the sun went down outside my hospital window. Around 10 that night, my phone lit up with messages from Cindy. She wrote paragraph after paragraph apologizing for the fake pregnancy scheme, but wouldn't answer the one question that mattered. I typed back asking if the real baby was Noah's. She sent back a string of question marks and crying faces, but no actual answer. Her dodging the question told me everything I needed to know. My chest felt tight, and I had to focus on breathing steady so I wouldn't upset Daniela. The clock on the wall showed past midnight when I heard the door creak open. Noah slipped into the room and settled into the chair beside my bed without looking at me. His clothes were wrinkled and he smelled like the parking garage. I waited until he stopped fidgeting before asking him straight out about Cindy. He admitted they'd been texting privately for months but swore nothing physical ever happened between them. He said Cindy was upset about Dad dying and needed someone to talk to when I was always at the hospital. Every excuse he gave just opened up more questions. His timeline didn't add up and he kept changing small details in his story. I turned away from him and pretended to sleep while my mind raced through everything. Morning came and the patient advocate knocked on my door with a stack of forms. I filled out the official visitor restriction paperwork, writing only Noah's name on the allowed list for now. My hand shook a little as I signed it. The advocate noticed and handed me pamphlets about legal resources and postpartum support groups. She said they see situations like this more than people realize. An hour later, the birth certificate clerk arrived with her rolling cart of supplies. She spread out the forms on my tray table and showed me where to sign. When she asked for the baby's name, I wrote Daniela without any hesitation. This was the one thing I was absolutely sure about in all this chaos. Noah signed his part with a shaky hand, the pen trembling as he wrote. We both knew everything else might fall apart, but at least my daughter would carry the name Dad wanted. Down the hall, I could hear Mom's voice getting louder at the nurse's station. She demanded to see her granddaughter and threatened to sue the hospital for violating her rights. The shouting went on for several minutes before security showed up. I heard their radios crackling and Mom's voice getting farther away as they walked her toward the elevators. She yelled about discrimination and elder abuse all the way down the hall until the elevator doors finally cut off her voice. The patient advocate knocked on my door about 20 minutes later holding a folder full of papers. She sat down in the chair Noah had been using and spread everything out on the tray table. She pointed to different forms explaining how Mom's threats about the mortgage and bills might count as something called economic abuse. She left me pamphlets about setting boundaries with toxic family members and wrote down phone numbers for legal aid. Noah picked up one of the papers about financial control, and I saw his jaw tighten as he read through it. After she left, I turned to Noah and told him we needed to get a paternity test for Cindy's baby to find out the truth once and for all. He agreed right away without any argument, which made me wonder if he was innocent or just calling my bluff. We spent the next hour on his phone looking up labs that do prenatal testing while Daniela slept in my arms. The first place we called said the test would cost $2,000, and we'd need Cindy to sign consent forms since it was her baby being tested. The woman on the phone explained it would take 2 weeks for results once they got all the samples. My chest got tight thinking about that much money, but I needed to know the truth. I grabbed the hospital notepad and started writing down all the bills Mom paid for us compared to what we could handle on our own. The car insurance was $300 a month and the phone bill was another $150. The mortgage was the real problem since Mom co-signed and we'd need to refinance without her, which meant qualifying on just our incomes. Noah suggested maybe his parents could help, but I wasn't ready to bring more family into this mess. 2 days later, discharge day finally came, and the nurse wheeled me out to Noah's car with Daniela in her car seat. On the drive home, I told Noah he needed to sleep on the couch until we figured everything out. He just nodded and didn't try to argue or convince me otherwise. When we got home, he quietly took his pillow from our bedroom and carried it downstairs while I settled into bed with Daniela. That first night home, I couldn't stop looking around the nursery we'd spent months decorating together. I opened drawers looking for anything that seemed off, and found receipts from the past few months stuffed in random places. Most were normal stuff like diapers and formula, but then I found his credit card statement from last month. There were 3 charges at a gas station 2 blocks from Cindy's apartment on days he said he was working late. My hands shook as I put the papers back and tried to focus on feeding Daniela instead of crying. The next morning, I called the number on the patient advocate's pamphlet and scheduled a free consultation with an attorney who handles family financial abuse cases. The assistant said they see situations like mine all the time and could fit me in 3 days from now. I wrote down the appointment time and felt a tiny bit of hope for the first time since Brad showed up. 3 days later, Noah's mom watched Daniela while I drove to the attorney's office downtown. The lawyer was a woman about Mom's age who listened without interrupting as I explained everything from Dad's death to Mom's threats. She pulled out a legal pad and started writing notes about power of attorney and something called conservatorship for Grandma. She explained that what Mom was doing with the financial threats could definitely be considered abuse and told me to start documenting everything. She said she'd take my case for a reduced fee since I was dealing with financial abuse and gave me homework to gather all the evidence I could find. That night, I was scrolling through social media when Cindy posted a new ultrasound picture with hearts all around it. I saved the image and did a reverse search like I had with her old fake ones, but this time nothing came up. This picture was real, which made everything even more complicated than before. I needed to find Noah's insurance documents for the attorney, so I logged into his email while he was downstairs. I searched for the insurance company name and started downloading files when I noticed an old receipt from a rideshare app. The pickup was our house, and the drop-off was an address I didn't recognize, so I typed it into Maps. The location was 2 blocks from Cindy's apartment, and the date was 6 weeks ago when he said he was at a work dinner. My stomach dropped as more pieces started clicking together in my head. I printed the receipt with shaking hands and waited for Noah to come upstairs for bed. When he walked in, I held up the paper and watched his face change from confused to guilty in seconds. He started talking fast about how Cindy called him crying that night, drunk at some bar after another fight with Mom. He said she needed a ride and he didn't want to worry me since I was already stressed about Dad being in hospice. Every word he said made it worse because he'd lied to me about a work dinner that night. I told him to explain why he dropped her off 2 blocks away instead of at her actual building. He said she wanted to walk to clear her head, but the look on his face told me he was making it up as he went. The next morning, an email came from the lab with consent forms attached for the paternity test we'd discussed. The forms needed Cindy's signature since we'd be testing her baby's DNA through her blood while she was still pregnant. I forwarded them to her with a text saying I'd pay the full $2,000 if she'd just agree to do this. She texted back 20 minutes later asking why I was trying to destroy our family over nothing. I didn't respond because there was nothing left to say until we had proof one way or another. That afternoon, while I was nursing Daniela, my phone rang with a voicemail from Mom. Her voice was cold and clear as she said she'd pull every bit of financial support if I went through with any testing. She listed everything she paid for like she was reading a grocery list. The mortgage, the car insurance, the phone bills, even the Netflix account she'd added us 2 years ago. She said I had 24 hours to drop this ridiculous investigation, or she'd leave us with nothing. I saved the voicemail and immediately forwarded it to my attorney's email with a note about the threats escalating. My attorney called back within an hour and asked me to come in the next day to discuss options. When I got to her office, she had already pulled together information about refinancing mortgages without a cosigner. She showed me how we could qualify based on Noah's income alone, if we could put down another $10,000. She also had a stack of papers about different car insurance companies and phone plans that would cost less than what Mom was paying. She gave me contact information for 3 financial advisors who specifically worked with people leaving abusive family situations. The path forward existed, but looking at all those numbers made my head spin. 2 weeks later at Daniela's first pediatrician appointment, I filled out all the paperwork listing only myself as the emergency contact. The nurse asked about other family members, and I just shook my head without explaining. During the exam, the doctor noticed I seemed tense and asked if I was doing okay with the adjustment to motherhood. She handed me a postpartum depression screening form, and I answered honestly about the anxiety keeping me up at night. My score was high enough that she wanted to prescribe medication, but I refused since I was breastfeeding. She gave me pamphlets about support groups and breathing exercises instead. A few days later, Cindy texted asking if we could meet while Mom was at work. I suggested a coffee shop downtown, and she agreed to come the next morning. When I got there, she was already sitting in a corner booth looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. She said she'd do the test if I paid for everything, and promised not to tell Mom until the results came back. The way she kept checking the door and her phone told me she already knew what those results would say. She signed the consent forms right there with her hand shaking so bad she could barely hold the pen. The following week, we all met at the lab for the actual testing. Noah went first, letting the technician swab the inside of his cheek while I held Daniela in the waiting room. Then Cindy went back for her blood draw since they needed her blood to test the baby's DNA. The technician explained the chain of custody procedures, how they'd seal everything with special tape and signatures. Cindy wouldn't look at me or Noah the entire time we were there. 2 days after the test, the lab called me because Mom had called them claiming identity theft and fraud. She'd somehow found out about the testing and was trying to stop it by saying we'd stolen Cindy's identity. The lab supervisor was very professional and said they dealt with interfering family members all the time in paternity cases. They verified consent with me and Cindy directly, and confirmed they would proceed with testing despite Mom's attempts to stop them. That night, Noah finally broke down and admitted he'd gone to Cindy's apartment once about 6 weeks ago. He said Mom had been calling him at work, pressuring him about me and the baby name situation. He went to talk to Cindy about backing off but insisted nothing happened between them. He said they just talked for an hour and he left, but the trust was already gone. I started writing everything down in a journal my attorney had suggested keeping. Every conversation, every text, every strange receipt I found got documented with dates and times. 3 days before the results were due, my attorney called with unexpected news. She'd been going through Dad's papers from the hospice and found a letter he'd written about wanting me to name my daughter Daniela. The letter wasn't legally binding for anything, but it clearly showed Dad's wishes in his own handwriting. She suggested keeping it ready in case Mom tried any legal threats about grandparent rights or custody interference. The next morning, my phone rang while I was changing Daniela's diaper, and Mom's voice came through cold and sharp saying she'd filed papers with the court, claiming I wasn't mentally stable enough to make decisions about Grandma's care. My hands shook as I called my attorney, who said she'd contact Grandma's doctor right away to get a proper evaluation done before any judge could rule on Mom's request. The whole situation was getting uglier by the day, and I could barely keep up with all the legal moves Mom was making against me. That first night home alone with Daniela turned into 3 straight nights without any real sleep, and by the 3rd night I found myself sitting on the bathroom floor just sobbing while the baby cried in her crib down the hall. I grabbed my phone and dialed the postpartum support hotline number the hospital had given me, and talked to a woman who reminded me that feeling overwhelmed was normal and I wasn't failing as a mother. She walked me through some breathing exercises and gave me practical tips like sleeping when the baby sleeps, even if it meant leaving dishes in the sink. The next afternoon, while I was finally getting a nap, Brad sent me a text with screenshots attached that made my stomach turn. The images showed months of text messages between him and Cindy, where she'd been planning the whole fake pregnancy scheme and asking him to play along for money. My attorney called within an hour of getting the screenshots, saying this evidence of fraud would help our case significantly, especially with Mom's power of attorney filing. 2 days later, the lab called while I was feeding Daniela, and the woman on the phone said the preliminary results showed Noah was excluded as the father with 99.9% certainty. Relief washed over me so hard I started crying, but then I realized our marriage problems weren't going to disappear just because he hadn't cheated with Cindy. Trust takes way longer to rebuild than it takes to run a DNA test, and we still had so much broken between us. I felt relieved about the test results, but incredibly sad watching my whole family fall apart around me while I tried to take care of a newborn. Daniela deserved so much better than all this chaos and fighting, so I picked up the phone and made an appointment with a family therapist for the following week. Noah showed up at the door that evening with tears already running down his face before I even let him in. He broke down completely in our living room, saying he'd felt so pushed aside when Dad got sick and I spent all those months sleeping at the hospital. He admitted making bad choices and keeping secrets, but swore over and over that he never cheated on me with anyone, including Cindy. I sat there listening to him sob without offering forgiveness, because I wasn't ready for that yet. Our first couples therapy session 3 days later started with the therapist having us establish ground rules about complete honesty and transparency going forward if we wanted any chance of saving our marriage. She suggested Noah should stay somewhere else while we worked through our issues, and his parents had already offered their guest room. The therapist spent most of the session identifying how Mom's financial control over us was actually emotional abuse and enmeshment that had been going on for years. She assigned us homework to each write out our non-negotiable boundaries, and when I got home and started my list, it ended up being way longer than I expected. 4 days after that session, Mom showed up at my door with bags of groceries and a document she wanted me to sign that would legally change Daniela's name to something else. When I refused to even look at the papers, she dumped all the groceries on my front porch and started screaming about ungrateful daughters who didn't appreciate everything she'd done for them. The neighbors were watching from their windows, and one even came out to ask if I needed help, but Mom was already getting in her car and peeling out of my driveway. The very next morning, I got a call from Grandma's care facility saying she'd wandered out during a shift change and was found confused at a bus stop 3 miles away. This made it crystal clear that we needed proper oversight of her care and her assets, instead of letting Mom have control. My attorney filed for an emergency conservatorship hearing that same day, saying Grandma's safety was at risk, and the court scheduled it for the following week. My attorney spent the next 3 days helping me gather bank statements and text messages showing Mom's pattern of financial threats and manipulation. She had me write down every incident I could remember where Mom used money to control my decisions, and the list filled 12 pages. The attorney photocopied everything and organized it into a binder with tabs for different types of evidence. She said the judge would want to see clear patterns, not just isolated incidents. While I was at the attorney's office on the 3rd day, Cindy texted asking if we could meet privately at the coffee shop near her apartment. She looked terrible when I got there, dark circles under her eyes and her hands shaking as she held her tea. She leaned across the table and whispered that the baby's father was someone from her office, a guy named Mark who had a wife and 2 kids. She begged me not to tell anyone, especially Mom, because it would ruin everything. I told her that keeping secrets was exactly what got our family into this mess in the first place. She started crying right there in the coffee shop, saying Mom would destroy her if she found out the truth. I reminded her that Mom's reaction wasn't my problem anymore, and I wasn't going to lie for her, but I also wasn't going to spread her business around. The conversation ended with her sobbing into napkins while other customers stared at us. That same evening, Noah came by to pack more of his clothes and told me his parents had cleared out their guest room for him. We worked out a schedule where he'd come over 3 times a week to help with the baby, Tuesday and Thursday evenings plus Saturday mornings. He loaded boxes into his truck while I held the baby and watched from the doorway. The house felt wrong without his stuff in it, empty spaces where his gaming setup used to be and gaps on the bookshelf. 2 days later, the lab called with the final official report, and the woman on the phone read the results confirming Noah was excluded as the father with complete certainty. She mentioned they could test other potential fathers if we provided samples, but I told her that wouldn't be necessary because I didn't care who it was anymore. The truth had freed us from one lie, but it had exposed so many others that I felt exhausted just thinking about it all. Within a week, word had somehow spread at Cindy's workplace about her pregnancy, and she called me crying because people kept asking about the father and making comments. She said her coworkers were whispering behind her back, and someone had seen her at prenatal appointments alone and started rumors. I reminded her that Brad had tried to warn her about what happens when lies catch up with you. Our next therapy session focused on rebuilding trust through total transparency, and the therapist had Noah bring his laptop to show me his bank statements and credit report right there in her office. He logged into all his accounts while I watched and printed out 6 months of transactions. We set up a shared calendar on our phones where we both had to log where we were going and when we'd be back. The therapist said starting from zero trust meant we had to rebuild brick by brick with complete honesty about everything. While going through old mail that had piled up, I found a credit card statement addressed to me for an account I didn't recognize. When I called the company, they said the card had been open for 3 years, with Mom listed as an authorized user and a balance of $800. My attorney said this was straight up fraud and helped me file a police report and dispute with the credit bureaus. She sent Mom a formal cease and desist letter about the financial harassment and fraud, delivered by certified mail so we'd have proof Mom received it. The attorney also helped me freeze my credit and remove Mom from every single account she might have access to. Each step felt like cutting another string Mom had used to control me for years. Mom must have gotten the letter because 2 days later she sent a group text to basically every relative we had, calling me cruel and ungrateful after everything she'd done for me. My phone started blowing up with messages from aunts and cousins I hadn't talked to in years, suddenly having opinions about my life. Some took Mom's side, saying family should stick together, while others said they weren't surprised because they'd seen how Mom treated Dad when he was sick. I blocked most of them and put my phone on silent to focus on taking care of the baby. That night, after putting Daniela down, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and started writing out exactly what contact Mom could have with my daughter. My hands shook a little as I wrote that she could see Daniela once a week for 2 hours in a public place with me present. I added that Cindy could visit if she came alone without Mom, and gave me 24 hours notice first. The rules felt mean, but after everything that had happened, I needed these boundaries to protect us. I made copies and sent one to Mom through certified mail, and gave another to my attorney who said it was smart to document everything. 3 weeks later, the conservatorship hearing finally arrived, and I wore my only suit while Noah stayed home with Daniela since we still weren't ready to appear together publicly. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood paneling and uncomfortable benches that made my back hurt. Mom sat on the other side with her own lawyer, while the judge reviewed stacks of paperwork about Grandma's finances and medical condition. My attorney presented bank statements showing Mom had been moving money from Grandma's accounts, and the judge's face got more serious with each page. The court-appointed evaluator testified that Grandma needed a neutral third party managing her assets, since family dynamics were compromised. Mom's lawyer argued she was the natural choice as the eldest daughter, but the judge cut him off and said the evidence showed clear financial manipulation. After 40 minutes of testimony, the judge appointed a professional conservator from a company that specialized in elder care finances. Mom stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor, and her lawyer had to grab her arm to stop her from approaching the bench. The judge warned her about courtroom behavior and said the decision was final, pending any appeals which would take months to process. Outside the courthouse, Mom was waiting by the doors, even though her lawyer was trying to pull her toward the parking garage. She blocked my path and called me vindictive and selfish and said Dad would be ashamed of how I was destroying our family. Her face was red and people were starting to stare at us on the courthouse steps. I wanted to defend myself, but remembered what my therapist said about not engaging with manipulation tactics. I walked around her without saying anything while she kept yelling that I'd regret this when I needed family someday. My attorney witnessed the whole thing and made notes about Mom's behavior for our records, in case we needed a restraining order. 2 days later, my phone buzzed at 3 in the morning with a text from Cindy saying she was in labor 6 weeks early. She asked if I could come to the hospital because she was scared, and Mom was being too intense about everything. I sat in bed for 10 minutes debating whether to go while Noah held Daniela, who had woken up hungry. Part of me remembered the sister who used to braid my hair and share secrets before Mom's manipulation destroyed everything between us. I finally got dressed and drove to the hospital while Noah stayed with the baby since we'd agreed to minimize contact during our separation period. The maternity ward was the same one where I'd given birth just weeks earlier, and the smell of disinfectant brought back all those memories. Cindy was alone in her room with monitors beeping and an IV drip running into her arm. She grabbed my hand when I walked in and started crying about how scared she was and how sorry she was about everything. When the contractions got bad, she squeezed my hand so hard my rings dug into my fingers, but I didn't pull away. The nurse said the baby was coming fast for a premature delivery, and they called the NICU team to be ready. Mom showed up an hour later and tried to take over, but Cindy actually told her to wait outside because she wanted me there instead. Mom's face went white with shock, but she left when the nurse said only one support person was allowed during delivery. 8 hours later, Cindy's son was born at 4 pounds and 3 ounces, but breathing on his own, which the doctor said was excellent for his gestational age. They whisked him to the NICU for monitoring, but let Cindy hold him for a minute first, while tears ran down her face. When the nurse came with the birth certificate paperwork and asked about the baby's name, Cindy hesitated for a long time. Mom had come back in and immediately said his name should be Daniel after Dad, but Cindy shook her head. She looked at me and then wrote Xian on the form, which was her favorite name from high school that had nothing to do with our family drama. Mom tried to argue, but Cindy said it was her baby and her choice, and signed the papers before Mom could say anything else. The section for father's information stayed blank, and when the nurse asked if she was sure, Cindy just nodded without explaining. The hospital social worker came by with pamphlets about resources for single mothers, including financial assistance and support groups. Mom realized she couldn't control this story the way she'd planned, and left the room without saying goodbye to either of us. That evening, Mom posted on social media announcing the birth of her grandson Daniel, with a photo she'd taken of the baby without permission. Within minutes, Cindy commented underneath correcting that his name was Jian, and asking Mom to respect her choices as a mother. I saw the whole exchange on my phone while feeding Daniela, and felt proud of Cindy for standing up to Mom publicly. Several relatives liked Cindy's comment, which probably made Mom furious, but showed that people were starting to see through her manipulation. The next evening, Noah came over for his scheduled time with Daniela, and we ended up sitting together on the couch while she ate. His hand brushed mine when he adjusted her blanket, and neither of us pulled away immediately like we'd been doing. The hurt was still there between us, but so was the connection we'd built over 8 years together. We weren't ready to talk about us, but we both knew we weren't ready to end things completely either. During our next therapy session, the counselor pulled out a whiteboard and created a detailed 90-day plan for us to follow. She wrote out that Noah would keep living with his parents while I stayed in the house with clear visiting schedules for him with Daniela. We'd have no contact with Mom during this period, and would meet weekly for counseling to work on rebuilding trust. She said if we could follow the structure successfully for 3 months, we could reassess living together again with new boundaries. The plan felt overwhelming, but having clear rules and expectations gave us something concrete to work toward, instead of just floating in uncertainty. The first thing I did was call my own insurance company and set up my car insurance without Mom's name on it. The agent on the phone walked me through different plans, and I picked the cheapest one that still gave me good coverage. Next, I went to the phone store and got my own plan, transferring my number off Mom's family account, which took 2 hours of paperwork. The attorney helped me fill out forms for Dad's life insurance that Mom never told me about. She said it would take a few weeks to process, but Dad had left me as the only person who could get the money. 3 weeks later, a check for $15,000 showed up in my mailbox. I drove straight to the bank and opened my own account where Mom couldn't touch anything. The teller helped me set up online banking, and I deposited the check, watching the numbers appear on the screen. Having my own money felt better than any fancy thing Mom ever bought me. Around that same time, Cindy texted me a real photo of her son Jian sleeping in his crib. She wrote that she started seeing a therapist twice a week to work on her issues with Mom. The photo wasn't edited or fake, just a regular picture of a baby with no games attached. She said maybe we could try to build something better between us when she figured herself out more. I saved the photo but didn't respond right away because I needed more time. The conservator who took over Grandma's money sent me a letter saying everything was secure for her care now. Grandma's memory was getting worse every day, but at least she was safe and comfortable in her facility. All that fighting about inheritance didn't matter anymore since the money would just pay for her medical needs. One quiet afternoon while Daniela napped, I found the letter Dad wrote about her name in his things from the hospital. I held her while reading it out loud, his handwriting shaky but clear about wanting me to name her after him. She grabbed my finger while I read, and I promised to raise her with all the good things he taught me. That moment in my living room meant more than telling anyone else about the letter. Noah and I stuck to the therapist's plan of living apart, but we started having dinner together once a week. His mom would watch Daniela at her house while we went to simple restaurants and talked about regular things. We were learning how to talk without Mom causing problems between us. The dinners weren't romantic, but they helped us remember why we got married in the first place. After 2 months of no contact, Mom sent me a text saying she was sorry for some things she did. She listed boundaries she would follow if I wanted to see her again, like not trying to control my money or telling me how to raise Daniela. I wrote back with my own list of rules, including only meeting in public places once a month for coffee. She agreed, and we set up our first meeting at a coffee shop downtown for the next week. One night during Daniela's 3 a.m. feeding, I looked around my quiet house and realized we were actually doing fine. The bills were paid with my own money, Daniela was healthy and growing, Noah and I were slowly fixing things, and Mom wasn't controlling everything anymore. We weren't perfect and probably never would be, but we were stable and getting better every day. Daniela finished eating and fell back asleep against my chest, her tiny breath steady and peaceful. So yeah, that's basically the whole thing. Nothing too polished, just how it played out. Thanks for sticking around and hanging out with me. We'll do it again next time if you're up for it.